Hi everyone, today I want to talk about the greatest resource that Diablo 3 has outside of the game, which is the D3Planner. So I'm sure that you most likely have heard of it, have seen it. Pretty much any build guide uses it to compare setups and show setups, including myself and pretty much anyone I know that makes builds. And there is also other uses of it, which is also for your own character comparisons, for example. So it's not just about people making the builds, but it can be a really useful tool to optimize your roles, to optimize your items, optimize your character in many ways, and understand how you should proceed and how you should reroll your items, maybe what kind of upgrades you could get, and all these kinds of things. So here is the website. It's the D3Planner. You can just open it by typing d3planner.com and it will get you here. This is developed by Riv, who is also part of maxroll now with the D3Planner. So this is all on our website here and integrated neatly also with our guides. So you got everything in one place, which is great. And here I just loaded a profile. For example, you can save profiles here. You can make whatever build you like. You can choose the class, you can give it items, and then you can save them. And you type a name and it will go to my profiles, which, well, are a lot for me because I like making D3Planners, it turns out. And here you can also save them in folders if you like. So for example, here I have like season 23 stuff. I have maxroll, memes, whatever. You can make anything. I decided to basically delete most of the old seasonal stuff, which is not really useful anymore. I've recently updated all my planners. It's like 60 or 70 builds or something. So they're all on my Discord, in case you haven't seen that from one of my recent videos. But yeah, this is where they go. Here's also the import button. So you can just go here and you can actually type your own battle type, for example, and you can import your character. And like this, you have exactly all the roles copied. For example, we can just do this here. And that gives us my gold DH. It's missing some items here right now, but it will also show you exactly everything like in the game with what item is rerolled, all your stats. The only thing that D3Planner can't do is the paragons, so you have to assign those manually. So in this case, we just put whatever here, and then we have our numbers. So here I've loaded the gold DH now for my planners, and usually I have the standard 5,000 paragons, everything perfect rolls, and 150 augments, 150 gems. So this is the standard that we have for all the maxroll guides. So I just use the same here. And for example, here you can also open the different setups. So you can save and load multiple setups for the same build if you like, or compare even completely different builds if you want. So it doesn't matter. You can just, just copy one of these. There's a button here for plus that will make a copy of exactly what you have selected. And then, for example, here's T16, there's solo speeds, there's solo in groups, solo in bounties, and all this kind of stuff. And depending on the build, I put a lot of variations here because certain builds are quite useful in a lot of things. So it's really nice to have all the different variations in one place instead of having a different planner for every single build and every single variation. Now, if you want to compare some stats for your items for your own character after importing it, for example, you can do so here either by looking at the damage that you do. So for example, you just take this DPS value here, or you take the actual damage because this one doesn't count attack speed. So sometimes it's just about the hit damage and not the actual DPS. And then you can either look at this by changing something. For example, we can take this and roll the cold damage to dexterity, for example. So we have a much worse amulet, and you can see that our damage goes down here to 12.5, which previously was 14.2. So this would be a DPS loss of something like 12% or something. It's always good to just pull out the calculator in those cases, and then you can do like quick maths. 14.2, which was the higher roll, and then 12.5. So you don't need to do it 100% accurate. But here you see, yeah, it's a 13.6% damage difference. So we see that obviously cold damage is much better, which makes sense because on a Paragon 5k character, you have a lot of dexterity and it doesn't matter much how much more you get. So obviously something like this is a much better amulet. You can also compare it here on the right. So there is actually these increases per certain amounts of stats. So we see this here, for example, this is basically the ring rolls, what you compare here, right? The 6% crit chance, 650 dex, 50 crit damage. So this is all the stuff you can roll on ring. and this is usually where you have a bit of more wiggle room to change stats around, because most other item slots are quite fixed, right? You always have crit chance on your bracers and crit chance, crit damage on your amulet, and the crit chance, crit damage on your gloves. So these don't really vary very much. And the only other DPS stat on a gloves, for example, is attack speed. And then you have area damage, which is usually preferred in pushing builds, but it doesn't give you any sheet damage increase that is really measurable. So area damage has to be calculated separately, and you have to understand area damage scaling to really know if it's going to be worth for you or not. So with area damage in general, you can count it as a very valuable roll. There are actually certain builds where on the ring, for example, I would go with area damage over critical hit damage or critical hit chance. For example, I've done that for my GR 140 solo monk clear in season 20. And then there's other builds where area damage just doesn't really do much because, well, you have maybe like some kind of single target build, or you have like some ability that doesn't work well with it, or it doesn't work at all. Or there are simply other builds that are so hungry for cooldown reduction, especially like most of Crusader builds or most Necromancer builds, that you simply don't have any slots left to stack area damage. But typically I would count one area damage roll as something between 5 to let's say 12% extra DPS, depending on how much or how little area damage you have already and how well your build can utilize area damage by making large pulls, for example. So this is just a little bit of a rule of thumb. So there is actually kind of a competition between area damage and, for example, physical damage on rings or attack speed on rings. So we can look at that here, and we can see that, for example, a physical damage roll would give us 8% flat DPS, which is very nice. So you could argue for physical damage. There are some more stats you can see here in the planner, but they don't really matter very much. It's a little bit of like fluff numbers, I'd say. Maybe if you compare a lot of different builds, you can see the patterns a little bit and you get a bit of a better feel. But here's, for example, damage multiplier, effective DPS, all this kind of stuff. I never look at that at all. So I usually just compare actual rolls on the items, or compare passive choices or skill choices that buff me in some way, and then I see, for example, this damage value here or the DPS value, and I see the differences between the setups. One neat thing, if you want to compare stats really quickly, is you can also just click on these headers here and you can collapse it. So if you, for example, just want to compare your life and you want to see, for example, is vitality or is percent life better for my maximum life, so you can go here and you can quickly compare it. You see our life goes to 987 and here it goes to 992. So life percent is actually better, which will also show in the toughness. So this scales directly with vitality, for example, and you can see that here it will be slightly less, just as this. If you want to compare your character to something like this with the optimal rolls, you can just pull up my planner, for example, or the one from maxroll, and then you can also just change the paragon to your paragon if you want. So let's say you have like some paragon 1.5k character, it will usually always fill everything here already, and then you just put the movement speed and you put maybe no vitality because we already have 5k, seems pretty good, and then you can just put everything here, and you can compare this setup to whatever you have by importing. So you can have two tabs open and look at the numbers directly. So you see a bit of like the potential that you could still grind up all in one go. Or you just do it manually, so you import a character and then you import it again perhaps, and then you start changing your rolls from whatever is imperfect to better rolls, and you can kind of see the differences and see how much you gain. You need to know that Greater Rift tier is a 17% HP multiplier and a 2.3 monster damage multiplier for every tier. So it doubles roughly every 5 tiers, and it quadruples roughly every 10 tiers, and it's times 10 roughly every 15 tiers. So this kind of gives you a bit of like a benchmark to see how much damage improvement you need to get to the next tier with like the same rift that you have in your personal best already, for example. And this will maybe help you a bit to understand of what is the next step to do. So now if you look at this skills and effects tab, you also have to look at the right conditions. So you can, for example, decide to include certain things here in stats. For example, here, this strafe bonus would be the God 4-piece bonus, because that gives you 6% damage reduction. You see our toughness changes a lot. Otherwise, strafe has no other benefits. So if you want to compare damage, this doesn't matter. Same with this here, bladed armor, but you can look at the differences and again see that this bladed armor here gives you roughly 26% more toughness or so. And you can compare this to, for example, to the ball companion. So we take this and you see you have less toughness. This is only like a 15% boost. So usually this is the reason why we have bladed armor in the god set. Similarly, you have stuff like vengeance, for example. So this is an actual damage multiplier and this is always up. So you want to check that. Ambush, you can kind of compare, okay, with or without. So you have to average it out. Typically ambush is something like a 7% DPS increase overall. Call the weak, same thing, 20% multiplier. The good thing is that it also will show you what is a multiplier and what is an additive damage buff. So I've made a video talking about all those damage multipliers. That was a while ago, but that is still accurate for, I think, everything, because, well, this stuff very, very rarely changes. And you can check that out if you want to learn about, you know, the overall picture of all the passives and most of the legendaries in the game. And then you will see, for example, what gives you an additive damage boost. And for example, if you look here on the side with the damage multiplier, you will see that this is a multiplier and this is not just an additive damage bonus. For example, Taeguk will show up here in the damage increased by skills because this is an additive damage buff. This is the same as having arrow roll on your items, and maybe something like the archery passive for bows, that is also additive. And then, for example, Color Weak is a multiplier. On the skills and effects tab, you can also decide to include some group buffs if you like. For example, if you want to see something like a trash killer or a rift guarding killer for groups or something like that, here you can select the class and then you can add all the buffs that this class has. So here's the DH, it has Odyssey's End. So you can also change that around. Strong arm braces, they stack by the way, so you can have multiple supports using those. You can put in the Oculus ring and all this kind of stuff. If you want to add some items or some stats that are not part of your class, there's also a button here. So you have hide items for other classes. For example, Swampland Waders has been notorious to be used in many LOD builds. This is not really necessary anymore because Black Fawn's pants got changed to be like Swampland Waders now. So everyone has easy access to those. But for example, here when you wanted those pants with the extra elemental damage, then you had to do this. And also there is hide legacy items, so there are some items that are from old patches that don't exist anymore, but if you want you can add them there. And there's also class specific stats. For example, if you make a support character, you might want to roll some strength on the support wizard or something like that for extra defense, and then you can also do this. Also here on top you have the seasonal selection, so we have planners for old seasons, for example the Granger season, then the season 22 with the 4th cube and all these kind of things. So if you want to make any builds for these, for whatever reason, or you might see those at least, then this is here, and you can just change it to non-season to have kind of like a basic setup, and you can always just, you know, add something like this, and here's the dynamic change. You can just add the 4th cube. So right now we also in PTR times, or right after, we already have the new update here. So if you click on PTR here on the top, you can already see the follower update. So in season 23, you have the follower revamp with 14 items equipped on your follower, new skills, new emanate system, and you can find it all here. So you have a second tab that goes with your character, and those buffs will already be included in your stats. So you can see, for example, here, if we look at this 4% crit chance buff, here it tells you the maximum value it gives you. And here our Demon Hunter has 63% right now, and you see on the very bottom anatomy 4%. So that is already there. And for example, also stuff like the Knight's Wail will give you 100% crit chance, and you can also see that effect in your actual DPS. So here, for example, 94 trillion. And if we remove this, then it will go down, and you see that this counter will buff you by around 50% DPS when he pops his Knight's Wail. In the future, we are also going to have all these follower setups with the main character setup together on the maxroll guides. So whenever you see those D3Planner embeds, it's going to be there, at least for any solo variation. Obviously in groups, you're not going to have the follower, so it's pointless to have there. But this is our most recent addition here, including all the item changes for the next patch. You can also compare those damage numbers, for example, for Elite or for Boss. So also when you open a planner, make sure that you check here if this is like the right stuff. And also here in the bottom, if you have, you know, any kind of unwanted buffs. So sometimes people might select something there and that will inflate some of the numbers. So usually I always have everything disabled, and then I have like the generic buffs that are always there, or most of the time I have those enabled. But for example, Squirt's a bit optimistic, for example, in most cases. So yeah, there's some stuff you have to look at and see for like the actual values. Yeah, and that's about it. So I hope that this video helps you out in case you want to check out planners for yourself or make some for yourself. And just in general, as I said, it's a very good tool to compare your character to someone else. You can just import the battle tag, or you can also import your own character and compare it to the optimum. So in short, look at the actual DPS changes and also look at those quick comparisons between stats if you're unsure about what to roll on your items. Look at the actual toughness changes, and then also make sure that the whole setup is correct. So always check the Paragon tab, and then check whatever else you need to activate here, and maybe for any kind of support setups. And like this, you can really find out what works the best for you. For example, also with those breakpoint tables, so for certain skills, especially channeling skills, this is also always something to look at, because those breakpoints usually have a huge range, and you want to make sure that you hit the right one. And that's about it for this video. So hope you enjoyed this, hope you like it, and I'll see you guys next time.